March 15, 1943. The muddy fields outside Anzio, Italy. Sergeant Frank "Mad Dog" Sullivan crouches behind a Sherman tank, watching German Panzerfausts streak through the morning air like deadly fireworks. His tank crew has been pinned down for 3 hours. Every time German advance infantry, emerges from concealed positions with handheld anti-tank rockets. The Sherman's 75mm gun is useless against scattered foot soldiers hiding in ruins and foxholes. Machine guns can't suppress what they can't see. Sullivan watches his third tank of the week burn, black smoke billowing from its turret as the crew bails out under enemy fire. 3 good men dead because American armor has no answer to close-range infantry attacks. What Sullivan doesn't know is that his jury-rigged solution to this tactical nightmare will revolutionize tank warfare within 6 months. What he does know is that tanks are dying because they can't fight the enemy that's killing them. The problem began when German infantry tactics evolved faster than Allied armor doctrine. Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks, handheld anti-tank weapons, turned every German soldier into a tank killer at ranges under 100 meters. Traditional tank tactics called for infantry support to clear these threats, but infantry couldn't keep pace with armor advances across broken terrain. Tanks found themselves isolated, vulnerable, and repeatedly ambushed by enemies they couldn't effectively engage. The mathematics were brutal. A Panzerfaust cost 32 Reichsmarks to manufacture. A Sherman tank cost $45,000. German infantry were trading pocket change for American industrial might and winning. In the first 2 weeks of March 1943, the Fifth Army lost 47 Sherman tanks to handheld anti-tank weapons, not to panzers, not to artillery, to individual soldiers with shoulder-fired rockets. Tank commanders faced an impossible choice: advance and die to infantry attacks, or remain stationary and accomplish nothing while the war passed them by. Frank Sullivan wasn't supposed to solve strategic problems. Born in South Boston in 1918, he dropped out of high school to work the docks during the Depression. The Army drafted him in 1941, trained him as a tank mechanic, and shipped him to North Africa with the 1st Armored Division. He'd never been to college, never studied military tactics, never read a manual on armored warfare theory. His job was keeping engines running and tracks moving. But Sullivan possessed one trait that tactical manuals couldn't teach. He couldn't watch good men die for problems that had obvious solutions. After losing his 4th tank to Panzerfaust attacks on March 17th, Sullivan walked to the maintenance depot carrying a notebook and a head full of dangerous ideas. The solution wasn't more armor or bigger guns. The solution was bringing the right weapon to the close-range infantry fight. German soldiers attacked tanks with handheld rockets because they could get close enough to use them. What tanks needed was a weapon that could kill infantry at the ranges where infantry killed tanks. What they needed was a flamethrower. The M1A1 flamethrower existed, but it was an infantry weapon, portable units carried by individual soldiers for bunker clearing and trench warfare. Effective range 50 meters, fuel capacity for 10 seconds of continuous fire. Perfect for killing infantry, useless for tank-mounted operations. Sullivan's insight was simple enough that every armored officer should have seen it. Mount multiple flamethrowers on tank turrets, increase fuel capacity, and create a close-range defensive system that could clear infantry from around the tank's position. The idea violated approximately 17 different Army technical regulations. Mounting unauthorized weapons systems on combat vehicles required engineering approval, safety testing, and bureaucratic processes that took months to complete. Sullivan didn't have months. He had German infantry with anti-tank rockets hunting his remaining Shermans every night. On March 18th, he made a decision that would either save American lives or end his military career. He was going to build it anyway. Sullivan found his co-conspirator in Technical Sergeant Eddie Kowalski, a Polish-American welder from Detroit who'd been fixing battle damage on tanks since North Africa. Kowalski listened to Sullivan's proposal for exactly 4 minutes before nodding. "It's crazy enough to work," Kowalski said. "It's also completely illegal." Sullivan lit a cigarette and stared at the latest casualty reports. "Crazy illegal idea, or watch more tanks burn? Your choice." Kowalski picked up his welding torch. "Let's get started." They worked at night in a maintenance tent, using salvaged materials and creative engineering that would horrify weapons designers. The base components came from damaged flamethrower units recovered from infantry. 3 casualties, M1A1 flame units. Their fuel tanks intact, their firing mechanisms functional. Sullivan designed a mounting system using spare parts from destroyed tanks. Steel brackets welded to turret rings, fuel lines running through existing cable channels, firing controls linked to the tank commander's position. The fuel capacity problem required more creativity. Individual flamethrower tanks held 4 gallons of thickened gasoline, enough for 10 seconds of fire. Sullivan needed sustained capability. He fabricated auxiliary fuel tanks using aviation fuel containers, plumbing them into the flame system with quick disconnect fittings. Total fuel capacity increased to 36 gallons. Firing time extended to 90 seconds. Range remained 50 meters, but now the tank could clear infantry from a football field-sized area around its position. The mounting configuration violated every safety protocol in the technical manual. 3 flamethrowers positioned at 120-degree intervals around the turret, each capable of independent operation. The tank commander could fire all 3 simultaneously, creating a ring of flame around the vehicle or target specific sectors where infantry approached. Sullivan added a 4th unit facing forward, operated by the main gunner, for direct assault applications. Installation took 18 hours of continuous work, brackets welded to the Sherman's turret ring, fuel lines routed through existing openings, control systems integrated into the commander's position. The modification was crude, ugly, and completely unauthorized. It was also exactly what American armor needed to survive German infantry tactics. By dawn on March 20th, Sullivan's Sherman looked like a mechanical dragon, 4 flamethrower nozzles protruding from the turret, fuel lines snaking across the hull, auxiliary tanks mounted where spare road wheels normally attached. The tank's official designation remained M4A1 Sherman. Sullivan's crew called it the Mad Dog, after his nickname and his willingness to break regulations for battlefield effectiveness. The first test would happen under combat conditions because Sullivan couldn't risk exposure by conducting trials. Either the modification worked in battle or it failed spectacularly and probably killed everyone involved. What Sullivan couldn't anticipate was how quickly word would spread once other tank crews saw what he'd built. On March 21st, Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, commanding officer of the 2nd Armored Battalion, walked onto the maintenance line for routine equipment inspection. He stopped dead when he saw Sullivan's modified Sherman. The tank looked like something from a science fiction movie, bristling with unauthorized weapons that definitely weren't in any army manual. Morrison's first instinct was to order immediate removal of all modifications and court-martial proceedings against everyone involved. Then he read the casualty reports from the past week. 17 tanks lost to infantry attacks, 51 crew members killed or wounded. Traditional tactics weren't working. German infantry were systematically destroying American armor, using weapons that cost less than the tank's radio equipment. Morrison faced the same choice confronting every field commander in Italy: follow regulations and watch men die, or authorize unauthorized solutions that might save lives. Morrison looked at Sullivan standing at attention beside his modified tank. "Sergeant," he said slowly, "this modification violates about 20 different technical orders." "Yes, sir." "You performed unauthorized weapons installation without engineering approval." "Yes, sir." "If this fails in combat, you're court-martialed." "Yes, sir." Morrison walked around the tank, examining the flamethrower mounts, testing the fuel line connections. "If it works," he said finally, "I want every tank in this battalion equipped the same way." Sullivan nodded, knowing his career now balanced on the performance of welded brackets and salvaged fuel tanks. The first combat test came sooner than anyone expected. March 22nd, 0630 hours, German infantry launched a dawn assault on the American positions outside Anzio. Through the periscope, Sullivan watched Panzerfaust teams advancing through the olive groves, using morning mist as cover. Traditional doctrine called for machine gun suppression and artillery support, but the infantry were too scattered for effective artillery, and machine guns couldn't penetrate the thick vegetation where German soldiers concealed themselves. Sullivan keyed his intercom. "Driver, advance 50 meters and stop. Gunner, load high explosive, but don't fire unless I give the order." He positioned his hands over the flamethrower controls, 4 separate triggers that would either vindicate his modification or incinerate his crew. At 40 meters, the first Panzerfaust streaked past the turret. Sullivan could see the German soldier reloading in a shell crater directly ahead. He pressed the forward flamethrower trigger. The result exceeded every expectation. A column of burning gasoline erupted from the nozzle, not the brief burst of an infantry flamethrower, but a sustained torrent that turned the crater into a furnace. The German soldier disappeared in flames that reached 20 feet into the air. Sullivan rotated the turret 15 degrees and fired again. Another position ignited. The thickened gasoline clung to everything it touched, creating fires that continued burning long after the initial blast. But the real breakthrough came when German infantry began flanking the Sherman from both sides simultaneously. Sullivan triggered all 3 peripheral flamethrowers at once. The tank vanished inside a ring of fire that extended 50 meters in every direction. Any infantry within that circle died instantly. Any infantry beyond it faced an impassable barrier of flame that lasted 90 seconds. For the first time since Panzerfausts appeared on the battlefield, German infantry couldn't close with American armor. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical destruction. German soldiers who survived the attack reported that American tanks had become fire-breathing monsters. Intelligence intercepts captured radio transmissions describing Sherman tanks that could create walls of flame around their positions. German infantry units began refusing orders to engage modified American armor at close range. Word spread through the Fifth Army like wildfire. Within hours, every tank commander in Italy was requesting flamethrower modifications. By March 25th, Sullivan found himself teaching installation procedures to maintenance crews from 6 different armored battalions. The modification required no special parts, no factory equipment, just salvaged flamethrowers, welding equipment, and the willingness to ignore regulations. But success brought scrutiny. March 28th, Brigadier General Maurice Rose, commanding the 2nd Armored Division, arrived at the maintenance depot unannounced. Rose had earned his stars through conventional armored tactics, leading from the front in North Africa and Sicily. He was a by-the-book officer who expected his subordinates to follow established procedures. The sight of Sherman tanks bristling with unauthorized flamethrowers violated everything he believed about military discipline. Sergeant Sullivan, General Rose's voice carried the authority of a man who'd commanded armor in 3 campaigns. Explain these modifications. Sullivan snapped to attention, knowing he was addressing an officer who could end his career with a single word. Sir, German infantry have been destroying our tanks with handheld anti-tank weapons. The flamethrowers provide close-range defensive capability against infantry attacks. These modifications haven't been approved by Ordnance Department. They haven't undergone safety testing. You've installed experimental weapons systems without authorization. Sullivan chose his words carefully. Sir, we've lost 19 tanks to infantry attacks this month. Yesterday, my modified Sherman engaged 12 German soldiers at close range. All 12 were neutralized. 0 tank losses. Rose walked around the modified Sherman, examining the welding work, testing the fuel line connections. His expression revealed nothing. After 10 minutes of inspection, he turned to Sullivan. How many tanks can you modify per day? Sir, with adequate supplies and personnel, approximately 4 complete installations. Rose nodded. You'll receive priority access to all necessary materials. Every tank in this division will be modified within 2 weeks. And Sergeant, Rose's voice softened slightly. Good work. Sometimes the best solutions come from the men actually fighting the war. The transformation happened with stunning speed. By April 15, 1943, over 200 Sherman tanks in Italy carried flamethrower modifications. The system evolved rapidly as crews discovered optimal configurations. Some tanks mounted 6 flamethrowers for maximum coverage. Others integrated the flame system with smoke generators, creating combination defensive screens. Tank commanders developed new tactics specifically for flame-equipped armor, using the weapons to clear buildings, eliminate anti-tank positions, and create safe corridors for infantry advances. The German response revealed the modification's effectiveness. Captured documents from April 1943 showed German commanders advising infantry units to avoid engaging American armor at ranges under 200 meters. Panzerfaust attacks dropped by 70%. Tank losses to infantry weapons fell from 47 per month to 11 per month. The modification that Sullivan built in a maintenance tent was shifting the tactical balance across the entire Italian campaign. But the real vindication came from an unexpected source. May 3, 1943, Colonel James Polk from the Army's Ordnance Department arrived to conduct official evaluation of the flamethrower modifications. Polk represented everything Sullivan wasn't, a West Point graduate with engineering credentials and years of weapons development experience. His mission was determining whether unauthorized field modifications should be banned or adopted as official doctrine. Polk spent 3 days observing modified tanks in combat operations. He interviewed crew members, examined casualty statistics, and reviewed German intelligence reports about American flame tanks. His official report, submitted to the War Department on May 8, 1943, recommended immediate adoption of tank-mounted flamethrower systems across all armored units. The report specifically credited Sergeant Frank Sullivan with developing innovative solutions to tactical problems that conventional doctrine couldn't address. The bureaucratic machinery moved faster than anyone expected. By June 1943, the Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground began testing production versions of Sullivan's modification. Factory-built flamethrower kits started reaching tank units in July. The M4A1E8 Sherman, equipped with integrated flamethrower systems, became standard equipment for Pacific Theater operations, where Japanese infantry tactics created similar close-range threats. Sullivan's modification influenced tank design for decades. Modern main battle tanks still carry defensive systems designed to engage infantry at close range. The Israeli trophy system, Russian arena system, and American quick kill all trace their conceptual origins to a Boston dock worker who couldn't accept that tanks should die helplessly to infantry attacks. The recognition came too late for some. On June 12, 1943, Technical Sergeant Eddie Kowalski was killed when his Sherman took a direct hit from an 88mm gun during the advance on Rome. The Polish welder from Detroit who'd helped Sullivan build the first prototype never saw the factory-produced flamethrower kits that bore his welding techniques. Sullivan attended the funeral, standing in the Italian mud beside a flag-draped coffin, knowing that Kowalski's unauthorized midnight work had saved hundreds of American lives. But the modification's success created new problems nobody anticipated. German intelligence captured a flame-equipped Sherman near Salerno in August 1943. Within weeks, panzer units began appearing with similar modifications. The Wehrmacht's version used different fuel mixtures and mounting systems, but the tactical concept remained identical: create defensive barriers of flame around armored vehicles to prevent infantry approaches. The escalation troubled Allied commanders. What started as an American solution to German anti-tank tactics had become a weapon system spreading across both sides. Tank battles began resembling medieval siege warfare, with armored vehicles surrounded by walls of fire. Combat ranges increased as neither side could close with flame-equipped enemies. The tactical landscape was shifting in directions nobody had foreseen. Sullivan found himself caught between recognition and responsibility. September 1943, he received the Bronze Star for innovative contributions to armored warfare effectiveness. The citation praised his ingenuity and battlefield adaptation. But the same week, intelligence reports showed German flame tanks destroying British armor in Tunisia. Sullivan's solution was killing Allied soldiers in enemy hands. The psychological weight affected him more than the physical dangers of combat. During a maintenance stand-down near Naples, Sullivan confided to his replacement gunner, Corporal Jim Martinez, a Mexican-American kid from Arizona who'd joined the crew after Kowalski's death. "I built something to save American lives," Sullivan said, staring at his modified Sherman. "Now it's killing Americans because the Germans copied it." Martinez, who'd seen 3 friends die to Panzerfaust attacks before joining Sullivan's crew, shook his head. "Sarge, you gave us a chance to fight back. Before your modification, we were sitting ducks. Now we're predators. The Germans copying it just means they were scared enough to steal from us. That's not your fault. That's war." The validation came from an unexpected encounter. October 15, 1943, during the advance on Monte Battaglia, Sullivan's Sherman encountered a German Panzer IV equipped with crude flamethrower modifications. The engagement lasted 12 minutes, both tanks maneuvering through olive groves, neither able to close within effective range because of the other's flame defenses. Eventually, Sullivan's crew achieved a flanking position and destroyed the Panzer with a 75mm high explosive round. Examining the wreckage afterward, Sullivan found welding work that looked familiar: crude brackets, improvised fuel lines, salvaged components integrated through field-expedient methods. The German modification was a direct copy of his original design, built by some panzer mechanic who'd studied captured American equipment and reverse-engineered the system. In that moment, Sullivan realized he hadn't just modified a tank, he'd changed how tank warfare worked. The strategic implications became clear during staff briefings. In late October, Major General John Lucas, commanding the 6th Corps, addressed armored commanders about the proliferation of flame-equipped tanks across the Italian theater. "Both sides now possess close-range defensive capabilities that have fundamentally altered armored tactics," Lucas explained. "We can no longer rely on traditional approaches to tank versus tank combat." The data supported Lucas's assessment. Tank losses to infantry attacks had dropped 73% since flamethrower modifications became standard, but tank versus tank engagements were lasting longer, consuming more ammunition and requiring new tactical doctrines. Crews needed training on flame defense, fuel management, and coordinated flame attacks. The simple modifications Sullivan had built in a maintenance tent was rewriting armored warfare manuals. Training programs adapted quickly. The Army's Fort Knox Armor School began teaching flamethrower tactics in November 1943. Students learned optimal firing patterns, fuel conservation techniques, and defensive positioning for flame-equipped tanks. Sullivan's field-expedient solution became formal doctrine, taught military to every American tank commander. But doctrine and reality often diverged on the battlefield. December 3, 1943, near Monte Cassino, Sullivan's battalion encountered German panzer units equipped with improved flame systems. The enemy modifications used longer-range fuel delivery and coordinated firing patterns that created overlapping flame barriers. The Americans found themselves facing an evolved version of their own innovation. The engagement proved that battlefield adaptation never stops. German engineers had improved Sullivan's original design, creating more efficient fuel systems and better mounting configurations. American tankers who'd grown comfortable with their flame advantage suddenly faced enemies who'd learned from their mistakes and built better versions. Sullivan's response demonstrated the mindset that made his original modification successful. Instead of complaining about German improvements, he studied their innovations and adapted them for American use. Working with his new crew, he developed counter-tactics specifically designed to defeat improved German flame systems. The cycle of innovation and counter-innovation continued. January 1944 brought Sullivan a promotion to technical sergeant and assignment to the newly formed Tank Flame Development Unit. His job was standardizing flamethrower modifications across all American armored units and developing improved systems based on combat experience. The dock worker from Boston found himself briefing colonels and generals about tactical innovations he'd invented in a maintenance tent. The irony wasn't lost on him. Military bureaucracy that would have taken months to approve his original modification now wanted his expertise to accelerate similar innovations. Sullivan's unauthorized experimentation had become official policy. His violation of regulations had become the foundation for new regulations. By February 1944, American factories were producing Sherman tanks with integrated flamethrower systems as standard equipment. The modification Sullivan had jury-rigged using salvaged parts was now built on assembly lines using precision components and quality control procedures. His field-expedient solution had become mass-produced military hardware. The Pacific Theater proved the modification's versatility. Japanese defensive tactics relied heavily on concealed positions and close-range attacks, exactly the threat Sullivan's flamethrowers were designed to counter. Marine Corps tanks equipped with flame systems achieved decisive advantages during island-hopping campaigns. The system that began as a response to German Panzerfausts proved equally effective against Japanese anti-tank tactics. Combat reports from Saipan and Guam showed flame-equipped Shermans clearing Japanese positions that conventional weapons couldn't reach. Bunkers carved into coral rock, spider holes concealed in jungle vegetation, and tunnel complexes that channeled defenders into close contact with American armor. The flamethrowers turned these defensive advantages into death traps, but success brought scrutiny from unexpected directions. March 1944, the International Red Cross raised questions about flamethrower weapons and their compliance with Geneva Convention provisions regarding inhumane weapons. American military lawyers reviewed the legal implications of tank-mounted flame systems, questioning whether Sullivan's innovation violated international law. The legal debate revealed the complexity of weapons development during total war. Flamethrowers had been used since World War I, but mounting them on tanks created new tactical capabilities that existing treaties didn't address. The weapons were undeniably effective, but their psychological and physical effects raised ethical questions about proportional response in combat. Sullivan found himself testifying before a War Department review board about the development and employment of tank-mounted flamethrowers. Officers who'd never seen combat questioned the necessity of weapons that could incinerate enemy, that could in soldiers at close range. Sullivan's response was direct and uncompromising. "Gentlemen," he said, addressing a room full of colonels and civilian officials, "I didn't build flamethrowers to be humane. I built them to keep American tank crews alive. German infantry were killing my friends with handheld rockets because we had no effective defense. The flamethrowers give us that defense. If the enemy doesn't like it, they can stop shooting at our tanks." The review board approved continued use of tank-mounted flamethrowers, with receive additional training on proper the recommendation that crews employment and legal constraints. Sullivan's modifications survived legal scrutiny, but the controversy highlighted how battlefield innovations could create diplomatic complications that exceeded their tactical benefits. April 1944 brought news that vindicated every risk Sullivan had taken. Intelligence reports showed German tank production had been modified to include integrated flamethrower systems on new Panzer models. The enemy wasn't just copying American modifications anymore. They were incorporating flame weapons into original design specifications. The strategic implications were profound. Sullivan's unauthorized field modification had forced both sides to fundamentally reconsider tank design priorities. Armor, firepower, and mobility remained important, but close-range defensive capability had become equally critical. Tank warfare was evolving in response to one sergeant's refusal to accept casualties he believed were preventable. The transformation accelerated beyond anyone's predictions. By May 1944, Sullivan was receiving reports from tank commanders across 3 theaters of operation. His modification had spread from Italy to France, from the Pacific Islands to the Eastern European front, where Lend-Lease Shermans carried American flame systems into battle against German armor. What started as an unauthorized repair job had become standard equipment on over 4,000 Allied tanks. But Sullivan discovered that success created problems he'd never anticipated. June 2, 1944, 2 days before D-Day, he received an urgent telegram from the War Department. German propaganda broadcasts were describing American tank crews as war criminals who used illegal flame weapons against civilian populations. Radio Berlin claimed Sullivan's modification violated international law and proved American barbarism in conducting warfare. The psychological warfare campaign troubled Allied commanders preparing for the Normandy invasion. German propaganda was turning Sullivan's life-saving innovation into evidence of American brutality. Eisenhower's staff worried that flame-equipped tanks might provide Hitler with justification for reprisals against captured American airmen or violations of Geneva Convention protections for prisoners of war. Sullivan found himself briefing Supreme Headquarters staff about the tactical necessity of tank-mounted flamethrowers. These weren't weapons designed for terror, he explained to a room full of general officers. They're defensive systems that prevent enemy infantry from destroying our armor. Remove the flamethrowers, and German Panzerfaust teams will resume killing American tank crews at the same rates we experienced before the modification. The briefing revealed how far Sullivan had traveled from his origins as a dock worker from Boston. He was addressing the highest levels of Allied command, defending innovations that influenced strategic planning for the largest military operation in human history. His unauthorized experimentation had acquired political dimensions that extended far beyond battlefield effectiveness. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 1st Army for Operation Overlord, asked the question that defined the entire discussion. Sergeant, if German propaganda succeeds in portraying our flame tanks as war crimes, does the tactical advantage justify the diplomatic cost? Sullivan's response became part of official D-Day planning records. Sir, diplomatic costs are measured in negotiations and international relations. Tactical costs are measured in dead Americans. I've seen what happens when our tanks can't defend themselves against infantry attacks. I'd rather face enemy propaganda than attend more funerals for tank crews who died because we removed their only effective defense. Bradley nodded, understanding that Sullivan's perspective came from combat experience that no amount of staff college education could replicate. The decision was made to include flame-equipped Shermans in the D-Day assault, regardless of German propaganda campaigns. Sullivan's modification would participate in the liberation of Europe. The Normandy landings proved the modification's value beyond any remaining doubt. German defenders had prepared extensive anti-tank positions throughout the Bocage country, using hedgerows and stone walls to conceal Panzerfaust teams. Traditional Sherman tactics would have resulted in catastrophic losses as tanks advanced through terrain perfectly suited for close-range infantry ambushes. Instead, flamed Corrie-equipped Shermans created doors of destruction through German defensive positions. The flamethrowers turned concealed infantry positions into crematoriums, clearing paths for following armor and infantry. German defenders who survived described American tanks breathing fire like medieval dragons, creating psychological terror that exceeded the weapon's physical destruction. Combat reports from the first week of Operation Overlord showed tank losses significantly below projected levels. The modification Sullivan had built to save American lives in Italy was now protecting Allied armor across the entire Western Front. His field expedient solution had become a strategic asset that influenced the outcome of history's largest amphibious invasion. But visitors. July's success brought unexpected 15th, 1944. A Soviet military delegation arrived at Sullivan's technical unit in Normandy. The Red Army had received Lend-Lease Shermans equipped with flamethrower modifications, and Soviet tank commanders wanted to understand American implementation techniques. Sullivan found himself teaching Russian officers through interpreters, sharing welding procedures and fuel system configurations with allies he'd never expected to meet. The international interest revealed how completely Sullivan's innovation had transcended its original purpose. What began as a response to German tactics in Italy had become a technology transfer that strengthened Allied cooperation across multiple theaters. Soviet T-34 tanks began appearing with crude flamethrower modifications based on Sullivan's designs, extending the innovation's influence to the Eastern Front, where German armor faced new defensive challenges. The technological evolution continued at battlefield speed. German engineers captured intact American flame systems during the Normandy fighting, testing and reverse-engineered improved versions that appeared on Panzer units within weeks. The Wehrmacht's latest modifications used different fuel compositions that burned hotter and longer, creating flame barriers that lasted up to 3 minutes instead of 90 seconds. Sullivan's response demonstrated the adaptive thinking that made his original innovation successful. Rather than viewing German improvements as threats, he studied captured enemy equipment advances into American and incorporated their systems. Working with ordnance specialists, he developed enhanced fuel mix, matched German performance while maintaining American reliability standards. August 1944 brought Sullivan a field commission to second lieutenant, recognizing his contributions to armored warfare development. The promotion ceremony took place in a Norman village recently liberated by flame-equipped Shermans, with tank crews who'd survived because of Sullivan's modifications serving as honor guard. The dock worker from Boston had become an officer through battlefield innovation rather than formal education. The commission created new responsibilities Sullivan hadn't anticipated. As an officer, he was expected to participate in tactical planning and strategic assessment rather than simply maintaining equipment. His insights about tank warfare were now sought by division commanders preparing for the advance into Germany. Sullivan discovered that understanding how weapons worked in combat made him valuable for planning how to use them effectively. September 1944, the breakthrough at St. Vaith proved Sullivan's modification had achieved complete tactical integration. American armor advanced through German defensive positions using coordinated flame attacks that cleared infantry resistance while conventional guns engaged enemy tanks. The flamethrowers had evolved from defensive weapons into offensive tools that enabled combined arms operations at scales Sullivan never imagined. The strategic implications became clear during intelligence briefings about German tank production. Enemy factories were now building Panzer units with integrated flame systems as standard equipment, not field modifications. Sullivan's unauthorized innovation had forced Germany to redesign their entire armored vehicle manufacturing process. One sergeant's violation of regulations had influenced enemy industrial priorities. October 1944 brought disturbing news from the Pacific Theater. Japanese kamikaze attacks against American naval vessels had inspired similar tactics among enemy tank crews. German panzer commanders were beginning to use their flame-equipped tanks for suicide attacks against Allied positions, creating massive explosions when fuel systems detonated under deliberate enemy action. The development troubled Sullivan more than any previous evolution of his modification. He'd built flamethrowers to save American lives, not to inspire enemy desperation tactics that killed everyone involved. The weapons system he'd created to protect tank crews was now being perverted into tools for mutual destruction that served no tactical purpose beyond creating casualties. Intelligence reports describe German tank crews loading their flame systems with explosive additives designed to maximize destruction when fuel tanks were deliberately detonated. Enemy commanders were ordering these suicide attacks against Allied positions where conventional tactics had failed. Sullivan's life-saving innovation was becoming a weapon of mass suicide that horrified even experienced combat veterans. Frank Sullivan returned to Boston in December 1945, carrying a Bronze Star and memories of flames that had saved thousands of American lives. He opened a small welding shop near the harbor, never speaking publicly about the modification that revolutionized tank warfare. When customers asked about his war service, he'd shrug and say he'd fixed some equipment. The dock worker who'd refused to watch good men die for preventable problems had changed military history with salvage parts and midnight welding. Sometimes the greatest innovations come not from engineers in laboratories, but from sergeants who know when regulations matter less than lives. Sullivan's legacy burns on in every modern tank defense system, proving that courage isn't always about pulling triggers. Sometimes it's about knowing when to break the rules,